Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm streaming with your boy, True Little Tom. How are you doing, man?
I'm going good. It's your boy, True Ding Dong. How's it going? I am finally talking to the King Vault himself.
It's just how do you transition to formalism to libertarianism in a relatively short span of time?
Um, yeah. So just diving straight into the questions there. Well, for me, I actually, when I really think about it, I kind of haven't been into politics for as long as a lot of the people online. I think the 2016 election in America and just how loud it was and how it sent shockwaves all around the world. Because with 2012 in other countries, with Romney and Obama, you really didn't hear anywhere near as much about it. It was extremely modest. And I know that there were comments probably in America, like Joe Biden saying that uh, Mitt Romney was going to put everybody back in chains. I believe that was directed at him. And that kind of hysteria existed, but it didn't really reach its way to Australia and probably Europe as well. And so I didn't. And also, I was very young at the time of that election, um, but so it wasn't really interesting to people. It was just like two dudes like who's going to be the next manager of your local DMV. You know, that's it's like politics. It's boring. But then the 2016 election was just so loud and hysterical and vivacious that it really that was what kind of got me interested in it. And particularly through Instagram, if you remember people like, and this is a huge throwback, Nick Martinez with like ANCAP versus the world and all of that stuff. Those guys really got me, like the Rand Paul train and then eventually the Trump train. That's what kind of got me into politics. And so that wasn't too long ago. That was about 2016. And I kind of stopped being a libertarian in early 2018. And so we're coming up to probably me having been a formalist longer than I was a libertarian. Like I started making videos at the time I got interested in politics because um, I just wanted an outlet to express these ideas because where I live, like I don't have any access to the kind of intellectual or creative community that would be interested in entertaining these things, even if they disagreed. Most people uh, who I kind of hang around with probably wouldn't even know who Joseph Stalin was or something like that. Like they have very limited history of, like I'm the only person in my family who graduated high school. I'm the only, so it's kind of area I was in. And so I just turned to the internet as a way to kind of talk about these things. And anyway, through libertarianism, you know all these ideas of the non-aggression principle, and you kind of find yourself in this circle where you're reasoning about a place that exists before civilization, and you're arguing in this domain that doesn't actually have the premises that allow civilization to exist. You're talking about why taxation is theft, for instance, like how raising revenue to support public service, like that in hindsight or standing outside of libertarian circles, that is absurd. That is ridiculous. Like and so that's kind of something that I found myself doing in libertarianism. There's the non-aggression principle, which most people listening would know about, the idea that it's always immoral to initiate force against another person, which is extremely relevant, or I should say, relative to like our cultural moment with liberalism. It's kind of like the ideas of a particular group of thinkers in modernity taken to the extreme, which is commendable because the whole criticism of liberalism that we're about to get into is one that sees liberal ontology as actually being anarchistic, not actually allowing any governing authority to exist. Even if you believe in these institutions, like you believe in the division of powers, and but those powers respectively still are governing something, you actually don't have an ontological bedrock to justify those things, because so even if a liberal doesn't identify as an anarchist, they're operating on an ontology that can only arrive one at anarchism. But with the libertarians who are ANCAPs, there's respect in that they actually are honest, or I should say honest, they're intellectually aware of this. And so, there's something to respect about that. But anyway, for me, I always found the non-aggression principle to be shady in the sense that it's just like it's just an assertion, really. And there's people who try to demonstrate it in the history of like libertarianism over the last like 40 years, I guess, from Hans Hermann Hoppe's argumentation ethics, which is kind of similar to just John Locke in many ways. It's this idea of arguing for self-ownership. There's of course differences, and you can get autistic about it, but it's still this fundamental idea of saying that self-ownership is self-evident, and that from this you can derive property rights. But unlike Locke, who believed that you had to kind of defer to some sort of authority vis-a-vis giving up some of these rights, the libertarian just kind of says, well, hang on, if you've just demonstrated that these things are like self-evident, inalienable rights, then how can you then say that they need to be deferred? And so that's, there's something to respect about that. But for most normal people, that's the argument ad absurdum. They see how this leads to anarchism, and so they believe something else, and then these people just double down on the absurdum. So for me personally, to answer your question, there's the non-aggression principle. I never really bought into it. I always thought it was just kind of an assertion. I was more consequentialist, and also more just seeing that how private property, I believed, was kind of the vehicle for civilization that like liberated people from barbarism. This and just looking like you can watch a lot of these videos, and a lot of it by libertarians on why the ANCAPs from a pragmatic consequentialist standpoint, it kind of always just boils down to, well, if you look at socialist countries in the world, they tend to do really badly, while ones you would call capitalist tend to do well, despite most of the countries they would call capitalists, like Europe and like they don't have policies that they support. They have universal healthcare. They have like a minimum wage. In Australia, the minimum wage is $21, very high. And so they're conflating these countries that you would call capitalists with their own ideology, and then at the same time, we'll make a talking point about how capitalism has never been tried off the back of that, and that what we have today is corporate capitalism. And yeah, anyway, I'm kind of going on a ramble. The point was I never really fit in with the libertarians to begin with. I always was getting into fights with fellow members in the community. There's, of course, the last one would have been the whole esoteric entity Shane Killian thing, which was an argument over these giant social media companies and how they are natural monopolies, which doesn't mean that they literally own 100% of the market share, because, of course, that is absurd. We don't ever make categories based on such absolute terms. There is a continuum in the same way. Because purple exists, it doesn't mean that red and blue don't exist because of it. And so it's absurd to believe that something has to have 100% market share for it to be a monopoly. Well, secondly, we got into this argument over this, and that was probably the last one. And I keep getting on this kind of defensive, because I know what libertarians are like. Like, they're extremely argumentative. They don't like to engage on good faith. They don't like to steelman people, and they don't like to represent them well in order to have a kind of interesting and civil argument. And so, yeah, I never really got on with them. And eventually I just discovered formalism. This is kind of and Moldbug's basic idea, which repeats itself in De Juvenel, and even Hans Hermann Hoppe kind of created for me like the prototype to discovering these ideas, which is but Hoppe's argument in and of itself just kind of comes from De Juvenel, which is that the biggest leap in government control was when we tried to escape tyranny, not when we were under tyranny. If you look at under the great monarchs of Europe, they tend to have an average spending as a percentage of GDP around 5%, while today we all know that it's about 50%. This trend of around 5% goes all the way back to ancient Rome. The monarch had sovereignty, and so they were more willing to delegate autonomy to the people that they ruled over, because they didn't have this anxiety that their power would be taken away from them, and so they could afford to give autonomy to people. And similarly, I made a video a long time ago called, I think it's called On Monarchism and Democracy, and it's kind of going over Hoppe's argument that planted the seed in my mind for formalism. And then after kind of reading this mold bug idea, and reading people like Kurt Doolittle, who is not a formalist and is some brand of liberal, at least arguably, and his kind of take about how violence is, and I mean organized violence particularly, which is what the state is in the business of doing, is kind of the most fundamental instrument to creating not just civilization but individualism itself, and that its individualism is a social construct, because when you talk about the, like, say, Adam Smith's land of barter, where people go into some sort of space, and the hunter that hunts or has or farms oxen and plow or hunts venison trades his meat with the person that creates arrowheads, because they both find that specializing in their own labor and producing one commodity and trading it for others is the most optimal way to go about consuming things. That this all presupposes that they have a safe place that is defended from outsiders who wish to come in and appropriate everything. It assumes that they have some sort of trustworthy relationship by which they won't try to be to defraud each other, and it assumes all of these constructions that allow this safe place where we can actually interact with each other in market society. And so I'm not antagonistic towards markets. It's just understanding that they aren't the ontological bedrock of society, and they actually evolve. And so if you look at all of primitive society and even stateless society tens of thousands of years ago, it's extremely collectivist. It's egalitarian. How humans operated for the first 100,000 or so years was through, maybe a bit less than that, is through typically having councils, mainly women, where everybody would go and hunt and gather and bring back their resources, and they weren't even allowed to appropriate it themselves. Rather, they would defer it to a center, in this case, a council of women, as is the case in, say, Indigenous Australia and other, more archaic populations that we have access to studying. And then they would distribute it in a redistributionist fashion. And it's only much, much later that we actually see markets and this kind of land of barter that you see in liberalism actually evolve. And so for me, moving away from libertarianism into formalism it's the same process that everybody transitions from one ideology to another, which is you have typically a certain temperament. For me, I'm more militaristic in my mind than libertarians are. Like, I don't drink, I don't take drugs, I'm not interested in having some sort of lifestyle of mine uninfringed upon, because I live a pretty, I would say, pretty conscientious life. Not to say that I'm very structured, but I have a lot of, interest in living an ascetic lifestyle that is meaningful and purposeful, and not one of engaging in consumptive pleasures that would be like a lifestyle that would be promoted under libertarianism. So you have this kind of temperament, and then you just find ideas that are more persuasive to you in your experience because of some rational intellectual reason, but at the same time, most probably because it suits this given temperament. Like, you go to libertarian circles and you realize that they're all a type of people. You go to conservative circles and they're a type of people, and you go to left-wing circles and they're a type of people. Obviously, Jonathan Haidt,
Do you really call them
someone I've
people, then?
referenced. Sorry, what was that?
Do you really want to call them left-wing people a type of people?
Yeah. I like, it's a funny joke, but I think the left are admirable in many of their qualities. I'm not talking about like the social justice left that I personally believe are hysterical, and I don't see as having like a good theory and any sort of systemic analysis of anything, but are more just motivated by resentment. But I think Marxism is not one of those types of ways of thinking. I think Marxism is an extremely interesting and developed and complex orientation towards the world that's very hard to understand. And I remember back when I was a libertarian, I did a Let's Read stream where we went through Marx's Das Kapital, And I went around and asked every libertarian YouTuber that I knew, do you want to join me on this stream to talk about Marxism and Das Kapital? And not a single person had read it. And that was extremely illuminating for me at the time. This was about a few months before I discovered all of that stuff I was talking about. And so it's hard. It's smart. It's very intelligent. It's just that, of course, it promotes one type of resentment against certain groups of people that I don't think is productive, and I think should be mediated rather than encouraged, which is another problem about liberalism and democracy, really, is that instead of trying to mitigate resentments, it encourages them, it promotes them, it gives them a voice, and that's what like grassroots political activism is. And all the whole political process is just this evolution of different sets of resentments against each other. And so mediating them is what formalism is interested in, while democracy and like non-formalist political ideologies are interested in encouraging them. So yeah, very long answer to that, but I've just had 2 sips, and so I'm kind of got a lot of caffeine in me. So that's how it is.
You seem lately, like it seems to be that your ideology is very post-ideological, because yesterday you posted a tree about how Britain really left, or Whig Britain or Whig Parliament really left colonial America go because they were really sympathetic to their cause. You seem like you're trying to move the conversation to more post-ideological grounds, and moving beyond myths and stuff and narratives.
Yeah, so well, post-ideological is a word that we use in our circle. It has different connotations to what you might think it means at first. So I like to call these rookie, like or level 1 rookie arguments, and it's when somebody takes for libertarian. And the reason I use this word is because I still follow a bunch of these libertarian pages, and I saw, if you know Eric July, he had a video about the roads. And it's like this, when you were a libertarian, you would always get asked like, well, who will build the roads? And you think I'm so stupid that this piece of infrastructure that I just look out my window and I see it every day and I use it every day. And I've never thought for a second, how would this work in a libertarian society? And, you know, granted, I believe personally that libertarians actually, even though they might see it every day, there's a dishonesty in their mind, or they actually don't have an answer for it that's sufficient. They just don't care, and they just find the question uninteresting rather than easily answerable. But in the same way, it's a response people have when they are just being introduced to something for the first time, and then they use this kind of knee-jerk concern as an argument, as opposed to just asking it as a question because you don't actually understand the full scope of the system. And so with post-ideological, people will just say, well, sure, if you want to describe a post-ideological terms, you're still restricted to ideological words and sentences. And that is true if you define ideology as being just mere declarative statements about the world, just propositions and beliefs one might have. But we're not using ideology to just refer to beliefs about the world. We're using ideology to refer to an orientation that sees oneself as having a fairly monopolistic interpretation of things, such that everything within their scope, everything that they see around the world, the perspective they have, is completely separate from themselves, such that you kind of have this illusion of looking to the political sphere and seeing whatever your political diagnosis is as on par with how you would look in a telescope out into the solar system and study the planets, when really ideology is a reflection upon resentments and moreover, one, to use a very Nietzschean term, one's will to power, one's want to capture the center of society and then overcode or impose themselves on everybody such that things fit a certain structure that allows them as an organism to best survive and expand into the world. So like the perfect, or I guess the most immediate example would be how libertarians are people that are antisocial and aren't good at deferring to a social space, even though they profit and survive on that social space every day. So they advocate for a corporate hierarchy, and they would best succeed in they would have better lives genuinely in this type of environment, while a leftist is squandered by hierarchy. They can't compete. If you look at leftists, you see that they're a type of person. That type of person is one that typically has low testosterone. It's populated by like the margin. They're not populated by white men who go to the gym and play sports. They're populated by minorities who feel that they have been put to the side of society and need affirmative action laws and need help competing with others. Or they're populated by women who are interested first and foremost in policing a social order and giving imperatives to people and making sure the flow of imperatives is correct, rather than being interested in how things really are. And then and so you can see that they advocate for an environment that is non-hierarchical and is one by which they, as an organism, best expands and survives and introduces itself into every new territory that it possibly can. Well, then you can see people who are like fascistic and they want a military society because they are extremely militant, extremely have a high sense of disgust with different things. They see disorder as disgusting, and they see people going against the norms that have been set up through bloodshed and hard labor and colonial conquests and all of these extremely difficult processes. And they see these norms being violated and they feel disgusted, and so they would best survive in a military sort of society. And so in the same way, ideology is just a narrative in that, and this is what we use the word to refer to, that obscures power incentives and intentions from view, such that instead what you see is just a set of moral declaratives, which and so a post-ideological thinking is one that is not interested in these kind of just obscure moral statements, but is interested in disclosing one's intentions when it comes to how they want to obtain power in the world.
Right.
So, yeah, and so so that's what we mean when we say post-ideological. We're not just referring to being beyond beliefs or being beyond a set of suppositions about how the world works. And first and foremost, like, there will always be ideology. There will always be people creating some sort of like moral statement. It's just that then there needs to be a certain set of elites that can move beyond this and have their own sort of disciplinary space and institutional presence formalized, and so they can be made responsible and be given a definitive function, rather than just having like this rule by moral declaratives that is the rule by abstract concept that is a fantasy.
Yes. It seems like you want to shift the language forward that is kind of free of these ideological presuppositions about the world. That seems what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and the key is ideological, not just presuppositions. Like, there will always be beliefs, there will always be moral demands put to people. And we're using that word in a specific context. And so this kind of rookie 101, like, well, how come you're talking about post-ideological, using ideological terms? Like, I don't believe that is a valid criticism.
I wasn't trying to criticize it.
No, not you. I'm just referring to the audience, people listening who might be skeptical of that.
On your video on Syria, where you talked about the Red Empire versus the Blue Empire, or the Liberal Empire, the Great American Empire, you just basically outright say America should just operate like it is, an empire or hegemon to assert its influence, instead of it's going through the bureaucratic process.
Yeah, so for me personally, a lot of people, and I have friends in real life, and they are like extreme isolationists, And for me personally, I don't adhere to a label when it comes to my stance on geopolitics, and most people don't in the kind of reactionary sphere, because the isolationist view tends to see people as genuinely being like thinking war is a moral good, and so they see every geopolitical tension as just being resolved by boots on the ground in every scenario, which is, and just being extremely aggressive, which is not the stance that anybody really takes. Even actual neoconservatives uh, don't take that stance. It's just being smart about geopolitics and realizing that geopolitical conflict is inevitable. And so I know there's a guy who has a good account called Solar Imperium, and he once tweeted that being against war is like being against the sun setting, and that's kind of my stance. It's just getting rid of these obscuring statements and actually just being a realist about the fact. And being a realist about the fact isn't just celebrating one's like uh, desire to just dominate other people, but it's really one of just what's the word I'm looking for? It's one of just self-respect and preservation, because the point is that if the American Empire were surrendered, there would be, firstly, there would just be this era of chaos as all the players in the geopolitical battlefield just resettle and fight for new positions and try to reestablish some sort of territory for themselves. And not only in this period would living standards completely collapse, but the civil unrest and all these competing powers that can't have actual sovereignty over the place would be completely exploited by geopolitical interests, like just as Syria and Venezuela is. So I often use the example of calling, like, say, take ethno-status to think that the United States can be balkanized into these like ethno-states, and they can have their carving knives in hand, and they take the Midwest, and that's the white area, and then LA can be the multicultural experimental zone, and then the South can be the black ethno-state. I always use the term white Syria to describe how that would result just by looking at the geopolitical reality of the situation. But unlike, say, the American empire, the competing geopolitical powers that there are, like China and Russia, for instance, are completely illiberal. Like, take Venezuela. Russia has boots on the ground in Venezuela, and there's never any complaint about like Russia being like war hawkish country that wants to see your kids dead. Maybe by the left there are, but in our circles, despite them having boots on the ground in Venezuela, there's just respect from the dissident right. While then Trump just like signaling threats but not really doing anything about Venezuela is seen as like being dominated by the Zog and being owned by these war hawks and all of this shit. And so the threat of these places being illiberal, and the fact that Russia will just put boots on the ground without in Venezuela just for it to respect its own self-interest, without having to conjure up an ideological narrative like that they're bringing democracy to all of these tyrannical places, and democracy is not an option, and all of these talking points you hear, and all of these fake, I guess what you could call fake news about gas attacks. They can just say, well, we have it in our self-interest that we have boots on the ground in this place, and so we will do it. And so what this means that it is if these geopolitical centers become our new world overlords, they would happily say build a landing strip in a historical town in some European village, or go to America and just undo all of these parts of our own lifestyle that we have reference to and revere, and they would do it happily because they aren't liberals. And so the point is made is that China and Russia would ultimately take advantage of all of the chaos created by balkanizing the American empire, and this vacuum that would exist, and they would become overlords, like just, and they would take control over the global financial system, and they would have decidability over Western nations, and it would take a very, very long time to get back any sort of stability in that situation. just as it's the case in Syria. It's not like in a year from now, after America like loses its status as an empire, that we're just settled under China. It would be civil unrest for decades, because this is how these things always work. They're never just clean transitions of power, just like similar to the liberal vision of of how presidents in America rotate. It's not just like a new president. It would be extremely messy. And what motivates the geopolitics of the reactionary sphere isn't some like LARPy vision of just dominating the world and being the god emperor or whatever like this. It's just trying to mitigate or do away with geopolitical situations that would make things worse than they are now, and responding to those things. So like you consider what happened after World War II, the British Empire collapsed, and the whole third world that was underneath it was eaten up by Moscow and Washington, and they didn't become these like sovereign nations like like people thought they would. There's dysgenics, genocide, and then mass immigration is another thing that results from this, and it's the same with the collapse of the USSR. For a long time, the EU had its foot on it, and you see proxy civil wars in Yugoslavia and Chechnya, and the same thing is that these collapses trigger immigration waves as well, and so you see in Germany and Sweden there's a lot of Bosnians and Serbs, and yeah, so and me as an Australian as well, like a lot of people in America are removed from the threat of China geopolitically. They think about it in economic terms, because China is a huge trading partner with the West, and so but they don't actually experience the more hard imperialistic side of China. And if you saw my tweet before, like in Australia being very close to China, dozens of politicians, student associations, political infrastructure, all these groups in Australia have been bought by the CCP, like the Communist Party of China. Housing prices as well rise 20% a year from entirely Chinese housing auctions, because 82% of residential buyers in Sydney are Chinese. If you look at 2008 to 2018, prices rise by over 100%. And so it's really like, and the reason why that is all happening isn't just because of like the free market being left to its own devices and people want to come to Australia, and the same applies to Canada as well. But it's the result of explicit policies put in by China to incentivize domestic investors to go overseas. And you might think that is like can't be motivated by imperial intentions, but you take for instance, our greatest exporting industries to China, like agriculture. Another famous one is baby formula and those types of goods. And you might think, well, we have a mutually beneficial relationship. They come here, we send things to them. Well, they just come in and they buy those things. They buy our agricultural industry, and they buy those manufacturing companies that send to China, so they can have a one-way street. Imagine, take the Ricardo example of you have two countries, and one country is better at exporting cars and creating cars, and the other country is great at making I don't know, let's say manufacturing, like clothing. And so the country that can best create cars specializes in creating cars, and the country that can best create clothing specializes in that, and then they trade with each other. But what if the country that can make cars just buys out all of the industry that creates the clothing, so all of their profits don't go to that country and their workers, but just go straight back to the one that's producing cars, and it's a lose-lose situation. So it's the same thing here. Australia is kind of ground zero for Chinese imperialism, and so we kind of see it, and you can see why you'd be more aggro being this close to Asia in proximity to defending yourself from their kind of expansion. And so that's kind of like geopolitically, I'm not one that just says we need boots on the ground in Iran, but I think that isolationism is stupid. It's kind of, if I had to be that explicit about it, yeah.
Yeah, and in our DMs, I sent you a list of questions. I also asked, what can we expect if liberalism is this? Yeah, when liberalism is displaced as the dominant ideology, like what can we expect in a post-liberal world?
Yeah,
Ideally speaking.
it's that's impossible to predict accurately. And but like Adam's blog, as in Adam Katz's blog, it's called GA blog. It's all about laying out what he thinks a post-liberal order will perform like, and it takes the form, and it's one that will take a formalist approach. And then Gans has similar writings about a post-liberal sentiment that are more liberal, ironically, because Gans himself isn't like a formalist. He isn't like right wing beyond just kind of being one of these classically liberal-minded people, maybe like a Sargon of Akkad kind of political temperament, if you get what I'm saying. We just appropriate his model. So it's impossible to really know what post-liberal society will look like, and there's many competing kind of points of view. You can be a pessimist about it. You can think post-liberal society will just be worse than it is now. Like liberalism is the death of the West, and then you can think that it's a new opportunity for spiritual invigoration with for our part of the world that will have a whole new perspective orientation. And so that's kind of the battle between, say, a Spengler and a Gebser. For me personally, I'm more interested in traditional philosophers, and not to say interested, like I think they're better or more worthwhile, but I just simply spend more time reading them than the generative anthropology approach to this type of question about post-liberal society. But yeah, just to be explicit, it's impossible to know. It's an open question. It's not something that can be answered definitively. Yeah.
I expect nothing, but I feel like I'm still gonna get disappointed in the end.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm a pessimist. I think.
Optimism is
I
for cowards.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I personally uh, like I'm an optimist in what I say, and I try to be optimistic. But I'm just talking about in like when you have this kind of question about like, well, what are you emotionally prepared for? It's like, well, to be honest, I'm emotionally prepared for the worst, and I think for me, one of the biggest points of pessimism was realizing just how little everybody knows uh, what to do. If you go to talk to people in our kind of circles, a lot of them, the majority of them, kind of just hinge on this accelerationist fallacy, which is to say they think that things will get so bad that eventually people will revolt and rise up gamer style. But there's plenty of examples in history when this doesn't happen, when things get so bad and they stay like that for a really really long time. And you can see like how all diasporas in history are typically diasporas for very very long periods, even thousands of years. And it takes and like even to use the Jews as an example, like you see them in they're in Israel. They have the Archangel Gabriel protecting Israel, and the Sumerians invade, and it takes thousands of years for them to kind of get back to where they were before, and to be like an imperial force in the world. And of course, they're an imperial force today, but not in the militaristic sense, in the soft power institutional sense. And yeah, so it's like this, like yeah, like take South Africa and like how bad things are there, where people are literally being murdered and raped in their own homes, and everyone still just has their fingers in their ear, just going on about the same talking points of like how diversity is our strength and everything. It's it's a fallacy, and so but it's it's the plan that people are counting on to just accept things are going to collapse and then from the ashes, everyone will just rise up. But it's not going to happen. I mean, it might happen, but there's no reason to think it's going to happen. It's not like a inevitable consequence of collapse. It's just as likely that things will just be bad for centuries. And so for me, my pessimism kind of develops from, like, if you look around at our circles, we don't have an intellectual tradition that is complete. Take a left wing tradition that completed and stuff like Marxism has answers to kind of every question that you would have about where the world is actually going. And so right now, and this is something Empirius has said, I think, a lot of the pessimism comes from understanding that the right wing is in a research phase. There is no, like, a lot of people in it are contingent or on this personality of dragging your knuckles along the floor and being completely antagonistic to anyone that wants an actual intellectual approach, because they have grown up in a time when the intellectual tradition is entirely populated by the left wing, and so they just think that being an intellectual and being a leftist are inseparable. And so those people, I think, are obstacles to actually, because like power and institutional support, they're hard questions. They're hard to answer. It requires a lot of thought to strategize about how we're going to actually win. It doesn't just happen naturally by the mechanisms inherent in nature or like some sort of social laws that exist, like that when the world collapses will spring up from the ashes automatically. Like, it's just a stupid position to have. And so I'm an optimist, and I'm an optimist in the sense that I believe in us, but I'm emotionally prepared for things to get worse.
Familiar with the Tocqueville paradox?
Sorry?
The Tocqueville paradox, the guy who wrote Democracy in America?
No, I'm not aware of that. What is it?
Just get straight on the way. He's basically a French diplomat who went to America that wrote about its institutions in about a 1,000-page book. But the point of the paradox is that the reason why we don't see when conditions are bad, revolutions don't just happen. But if the government overexert itself over the control of the people, revolution is most likely going to spring up. Like, for example, the Iranian Revolution in 1979, or the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918, or the French Revolution of 1789. It's just like these things. It's only when the elites in power become overconfident in themselves and their power, and get
Right. So for me, if you're putting it in explicit terms of revolution, as opposed to people, for instance, what I kind of had more in mind, or what I have more in mind for if there is a collapse and how things will get better, is just elites being so in disarray from the shit everywhere that they look to a certain group of people to become patrons of, and that might be us. I don't believe revolution as a concept is really a real thing. And you talked about my tweet about America, and the point of that tweet wasn't like just to be antagonistic towards Americans. I think America's a great country, and I love Americans and all that. But the point of it was just to illustrate that revolutions, even the Revolutionary War, wasn't actually the result of a group of people just being fed up with their sovereign, and so they overtook it and replaced it with their own. But rather was the result of behind the curtain elites that have institutional security cutting deals and that's how the Americans actually won the Revolutionary War. If you look at say Washington actually lost most battles in against the English and the British military, the greatest imperial power of all time up until that point. Like, it's absurd for them to actually lose a military conflict with one of their colonies. It would be like if America declared war on Israel and Israel won. You would know for certain that wasn't because Israel had superior military strategies and military power available to them. It would be because of America being a completely hollowed out imperial power that doesn't have a coherent vision of what it wants to be doing, and the eternal conflicts within it is what would prevent it from winning that type of war. And in the case of England against America, it's the same thing. You look at like the Tax Stamp Act that people attribute to what was the last straw to break the camel's back, was largely written and repealed by Whigs like Burke, who supported the American Revolution. If you look at that period of history, liberalism had declared victory over absolutism so loudly that there wasn't really a single Tory to be found in English Parliament. And so the king, who was against the revolution because he wanted to maintain his sovereignty, had no support. The majority of the English Parliament supported the American Revolution, and that's why they won. And so it was really a deal cut behind the curtain. And that's so my point is that the mythology of revolution in America is probably what creates this unrealistic strategy of just things getting so bad that, just like the Boston Tea Party, there's a straw to break the camel's back and they spring back like a cobra, like the "Don't Tread on Me" Gadsden snake. But it's not how the world works, and every single revolution, every single political movement, every single march down the street with big flyers like the civil rights movement, or today with like the Pepsi ad where they're all walking down probably supporting like Black Lives Matter or feminism, despite it being a completely vague protest. They're all funded by elites. They're all the clients of elites. If you look at Black Lives Matter, if you watch my video Liberalism 101, I talk about this. It's funded by the Ford Foundation. It's funded by it has hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of funding from the patrons. And that's not to say that the left are the only ones that are funded. Obviously, the dissident right has no patrons, but like Ben Shapiro, on the other hand, he is funded by all the elites that have conflicting interests with those that fund Black Lives Matter. If you look at it, and of course they converge on some things, like the whole free trade, that kind of position. Of course they converge on some things, but they also conflict on some things, and that's why they exist. And so that's kind of my point to be made about revolution. It's that I don't actually believe they happen. But yeah, so I'm kind of like running a bit low on time right now, but before I went, I just, as we get so fast into the politics stuff, I just want to ask Volt, like, how are you going? Like, what's going on? What are you doing recently?
I just graduated high school. Now I am looking for a job.
Oh, nice. You're not going to uni?
I am, but summertime. I want to just make some money.
Yeah, because we rushed so quickly into the questions. I just wanted to catch up a bit. Are you what are you thinking of studying?
What?
What are you thinking of studying?
Probably something involved the social sciences. I don't know which.
Oh yeah. Are you looking to be like an intellectual one day, or did you just want to get a degree so you can wage cock it?
I don't know yet. Being in academia, at least in America, is not a great career path.
No, it's not.
It's just you don't really make a lot of money. Plus, you have to struggle to get like at least an associate professor in a college.
Yeah, the only reason you would be motivated to do that is because you are so self-aggrandizing and self-absorbed that you believe that you can be like the next David Hume or Immanuel Kant or some great intellectual, when even if you're the smartest person you've ever met, there's a million people smarter than you who are in the same position and are equally unlikely to be recognized. And so I don't believe that. I think how the intellectual path works is that you have this self-aggrandizement, then it's a Dunning-Kruger effect, and then as you learn more and you realize how that even if you have a great idea, it's probably not going to be recognized. And this Achilles delusion of having your name remembered wears out, and you just become content sitting in your little office behind your desk. Uh, and if you knew that's where you would have ended up, you probably wouldn't have gone to be an intellectual. You probably would have done something else. But alas, that's the decision you made, and it sounds shit. So yeah, I
Yeah,
wouldn't recommend it.
yeah, but somehow the people we look for to public policy somehow became famous because we value their insights. Like Milton Friedman was a bureaucrat and worked for the Federal Reserve, yet became one of the most influential economists of the late 20th century. And just we just never know how things work out. People, yeah,
Yeah, I also just think people have lost faith in economists today. Like, I think that was a particular period after the wars where people were trying to like rebuild society around this one coherent vision, and this was something that had never really been done before, where the whole world decided that one ideology was correct, which was liberalism, and so economics is like the song and dance of liberalism. It's the music of liberalism. The whole world has to be respected and understood in economic terms because it is the perfect reduction of human beings to quantities. It's in framing, um, and so it's like the language of liberalism. And so this is why I think after the war you had Keynes, even Mises, Hayek, and then eventually Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, and these types being looked to for guidance. But every single one of their worldviews would find counterexamples and collapses in various countries that would have been completely unpredictable. And so I think today, in the 21st century, no one gives a fuck what economists have to say because they just know that economics isn't a science and that every model that's ever been put forward has countries that are suffering despite what the model said. And so I think those guys kind of are a product of their time, and that now like economics is still something that needs to be thought about. Uh, but it's just that people are more disillusioned by it, and there kind of needs to be a new approach that isn't so ideological. Because in the end of the day, we all know that like libertarian economists are just motivated by political libertarianism. They're not actually motivated by like economic consequences and creating an economic system that gives everybody the best lives. I mean, some are, but like the most aren't. So
yeah. No, the
yeah,
sad thing is,
what are you saying?
you know, the sad thing is that Milton Friedman wasn't that ideologically driven. Neither Tom Sowell. Mises, actually, yeah, he was actually pretty ideologically driven.
Yeah, I think
Hayek,
Tom Sowell, I have a lot of respect for being so open, like having been a Marxist and understanding Marxism quite well and writing about it in a charitable way. Like I think, yeah, like you're right. I just think that I'm not talking generally.
yeah,
Well, what do you do but besides politics? Like, what are your hobbies? Do you have any interests that aren't just like going online and talking to spurgs?
yeah. I I love movies. I love movies, and I like boxing. It's just
I, what
it's
movies?
just anything that's kind of like really more older movies that my mom's generation will kind of like, or more so my granny's generation. Like I like The Godfather. I like
Mm.
Rocky. I like those old school mafia movies.
Yeah, I
Just like
love mafia movies. Do you have an elitist take, or is it just really whatever floats your boat? Like, are you heaps into analyzing and criticizing a movie, or do you just like the sentimental enjoyment that you have? Just
it's just it depends. Like sometimes I watch really good video essays going over the themes. Let's say The Godfather, which is really about a story of transition of power to a father to a son, and also about a story how a man becomes evil, how Michael Corleone has really fallen, that he didn't become what his father once was. Like it's more of a story about it's more so a story about The Godfather is just about, at the end, they were family and Italians hope people appreciate all over because of that great sentimentality. That's why they consider to be one of the greatest movies of all time.
Have you
Um,
ever seen The Sopranos?
my dad's a fan of it, but no, just
You're not a fan. That's my favorite show, probably.
all those. And yeah,
Do you watch all the YouTube channels on movies? Like, there's a few out there that do movie reviews and talk about movies.
there's some of it, and other things are like like boxing. Well, I like Muhammad Ali. He's a
Oh yeah,
very he's a very great man in many respects. Kind of hope I could be kind of like him, like what type of person he was. He was,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. My dad loves Muhammad Ali, and so I have a whole. When I was at home, I'd have a whole bunch of DVDs and documentaries on him.
yeah. So it's like
Um,
he's
yeah.
one of the most documented man of all time. Like there's so much information about him.
So you're on YouTube. Are
Yeah.
you big into watching YouTube videos, or
Uh,
is this more something you kind of saw as just a necessary instrument to pursue your interest in politics?
Probably a mix of both. I don't know.
You don't watch like PewDiePie or Let's Plays or any of that stuff?
No,
No, no. You watch like H3 Productions or any of those like
no.
reaction video?
It's
Yeah,
just like
yeah, me neither. Don't
it's just,
start. It's very unproductive, and you'll find that like those guys like don't they're not even like I consider myself to like comedy and to like funny videos, but I think a lot of the time people who watch those will just realize that they're more like trying to fill their time rather than actually enjoying everything they upload because like they're not like they're just how can you make a video every week and just be like really funny over and over again, unlike say like a good movie every once in a while that took it like a long time to make and was really thought about.
yeah. And lately, politically, I've been moving towards more geopolitics. I've been reading people like Nixon, Kissinger,
Mm,
and what's her name? Started getting more interested in Casilla Rice, the Secretary of State under Bush 43. Yeah,
yeah, because you've always been really like realism oriented in your politics, like you've never been into like Jungian psychology or anything that's mythological. Yeah, it's always been like liberal power, like De Juvenel. I know you like, and I see all those kind of authors.
just about I think one thing we have to learn, I think a libertarian or like if you're just a guy who is serving politics, if you read and since we come from libertarian circles and I've been following more left wing circles recently, they all sort of just have this great resentment to people like Nixon's and Kissinger's or even Bush, even the Bushes
Mm,
for like, what they did and what their foreign policy did in the world or how they made things worse in the end. But the thing is, like, they don't understand that you have to make a hard decision in the end. In the end, that the world imposed these circumstances on these statesmen. They need to force to act, and the choices are often evil. But there's always a degree of a lesser evil versus the more evil. They need to understand that because that's how things work in life too. Because the world you don't impose on the world, the world impose on you these circumstances, and you need to navigate through them to
right.
make
Like I
the
think people who think those types of political figures actually just get off to seeing dead children in the rubble of like warfare. That's just hysterical. Like no one is like that. I mean, maybe there are a few political leaders like there would be a few that are psychopathic, but like that's not how they like got there. But yeah, and so I know you like you like music as well. He
Yeah,
used to post Michael Jackson in my Discord a lot. I'm a big MJ fan too, of course, but
but you didn't really like the '90s R&B.
no, I like his 70s stuff. I like Thriller. I think Thriller is one of his best releases, but Off the Wall is a great release. I think those tracks on that are fantastic. Off the Wall, of course, is the remix into my intro song, the Saint Pepsi Enjoy Yourself is a remix of that song. Like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. I really like that era, but and Thriller I like as well. But in terms of the '90s, when was Smooth Criminal? What year was that? Was that '80s or '90s?
Late '80s, 1988.
Yeah, I like his late '80s stuff, like Dirty Diana, and Smooth Criminal. But like when you get to Black or White, and like that was when he was getting real weird, and like his pedophile allegations came out, which I'm skeptical about.
No,
But
there's no like real solid evidence for them.
no, I think that like most of the reason why I would be suspicious is just because he's such a weird dude, um, and because of his own identification as a child. Not because I believe any of I think if he was a pedophile, all of the people that have said that he molested him are not his victims. But that's my opinion. And yeah, but I'm a big MJ fan. Yeah, what do you like? R&B and that type of music.
Just like anything that sounds good, like that, I don't know, like energize me, motivates me on some type of level, or put me in a state of like a good feeling.
Right, like so you're not like a genre fan, like you don't commit to a genre, or you don't find that those songs that do put you in a good feeling are typically of one genre rather than another.
Yeah, just like I like Queen, like I like Freddie Mercury and this
Yeah, yeah.
and
Do you
some
like a lot of rock music then? Like, do you like a lot of those classic rock bands?
not really into rock, but it's just like it depends who I'm like listening to, who I'm like looking into.
Mm.
There's some songs I like that are clearly rock, like from the '60s, like um, this the song called "There Once a Man in New Orleans." That was like,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
yeah,
Yeah. All right, cool. And so you're more of like a passive listener. You're not someone that's like actively looking for music all the time and buying records and all that.
just Jim Jesus is more of a music buff. I'm just more like a casual listener.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Jim Jesus didn't like my tweet about England the other day. He was liking all of the dissident comments that were underneath it, which is fine. I respect. I mean, I don't agree with Jim Jesus on a lot, but I like the guy. I think he's cool.
he's honest. And just,
Yeah, that's why I like him. I think he's honest, and yeah, I think he's got a good character. Like he's not autistic, and he can understand humor, and I think his stuff he says about esoteric entity is really funny because I love esoteric entity. I hope he never leaves the internet. Like,
do you realize the state is unsustainable and supply?
I love that. Anyone who follows me who hasn't seen that, go on to type in David Friedman esoteric entity, and I think there's what's the name of Jim Jesus's video? Is it what an idiot cartoon and Cap looks like talking to a noble? I can't remember what it's called, but you'll find it. It's hilarious. That's great. It's one of my favorite videos on the internet.
How long I have to prove to you that you are mistaken? Well, 1,000 years would do it.
Yeah, so how many states existing do I have to point to you to like
And
imagine like putting forward an argument that the state can't logically exist, or at least for any sort of long period of time. But with yeah, I was thinking I wanted to ask Jim Jesus if I could re-upload that video he made, like the compilation of it. But I just thought that it was so long ago that I had the whole esoteric entity saga that people following me now wouldn't get it.
Well, it'd be a good laugh, but I know Jim Jesus wouldn't mind because as long as you're not some type of government agency or organization, you can upload any of its content with no problem from
Yeah,
there.
but it's nice to ask though. Like I don't want to. But yeah, I probably won't just because I said it's too far removed
Yeah.
these days. But it's yeah, look that video up. Anyone listening, if you haven't seen it, are you into what's like? Because I know you're in like the low key South in America. What's it like? Like, what type of media is big down there? Like, are you kind of more of a normie, or are you more like outside of what people are doing?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not the best person to ask what's going on.
Yeah, you're not like you're kind of doing your own thing.
Like, one, I'm not white. That's one
Yeah,
thing, and
that's true.
I
I was trying to get you to say that like you watch BET or whatever. That's really what I was. What's your? I'll have a good question. What's your opinion on the N word? Like, should people say it? Should everyone say it? Should just black people say it, or should no one say it? Or do you ever?
uh,
Or do you think that only black people should say it, unless
like
they give out an N word pass to white people, and then they can say it, and they need to be checked whether or not the pass is valid?
I come from a household where my mom doesn't really curse at all, so
Right.
I
But
just come.
if someone else said it on the street, what
Like
would
I
your
wouldn't be
diagnosis be?
here because like I come from a generation where it's just so normalized, like no one really cares anymore. Although you hear a few black kids, so like they really should be saying that, but I think that's slowly dying out.
Right. So you're just kind of neutral on it. You don't really care.
Yeah.
Would you give an N word pass to somebody, or would that be like distasteful?
It's just like you could say whatever, just like I don't really
Yeah,
care.
but I want a physical pass. Like, I'm not just talking about
Mhm.
you not caring. I want you to mail me a pass that lets me say it.
Okay, I will. Okay, I will grant all the people who live in Australia the N-word pass because they're gay.
Yeah. So I want a physical copy though. I don't. I want a license. I don't just want to be given permission.
Oh, you want a license?
Yeah, and I want you to send it to me. And I don't
Yeah,
want anyone else to have it. I just want to say it. I don't want other people saying it.
yeah.
I've never said it because I don't have the license. Of course, those words have never left my mouth. But that would change with a license.
Yeah, it will change everything if you have the license. I mean, send it to you.
Mm, all
Yeah,
right. Well, I need it, and I'd like it to be plastic, like how a driver's license looks with my little picture on it.
yeah, yeah. So, what you been up to? Why? You said you've been in England. Are you going to
Yeah,
school there, or you're visiting someone?
yeah. I'm in England, just visiting people, um, meeting up with political people, and I'm going camping this weekend, which will be fun. And that's why I was like kind of rushed to quickly do this because I'm waiting for my ride to get here soon, so I can just leave and go camping. And
Yeah,
yeah, I've been here for a few months. I'm here for a bit longer, and then I'm out of here. Uh, it's pretty cool.
yeah.
It's got a lot of history here that we don't have in Australia, which is similar to America in that regard. But America has more history than Australia. Like America
Well,
still has some like larpy architecture that you can go and cry about and remember, like King George or whatever. But Australia has none of that. We're all just like the oldest pub in the country is like less than 100 years old, and it's celebrated as the oldest pub, and it just looks like any other pub.
and it's like in England, it has more like ancient history, more of an ancient history that the modern state really started with the Norman conquest of like in the 12th century.
Yeah, like there's before that with the Romans, and Constantine has a big statue near where I am because he was here, and William the Bastard or whatever. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I like it here, but I wouldn't like live here.
Are you a fan of Braveheart, like the movie, the Mel Gibson movie?
I saw it once. Yeah, I thought it was good. I'm a ethnic Scot. I have a full clan buckle and everything from my family's clan, which is marked out really well. I have relatives in America, in Michigan actually, who moved there back in the 18th century, and I know all of the names of their descendants that are there today. And yeah, because like the Celts are always extremely spiritual and familial, and much more so than the Anglos. They're definitely a different specimen, even if they've mixed quite a lot today. In the sense that when Anglos go to another country, they kind of just uh, go about their own, like they forget the country they had come from, similar to how their ancestors would just pack up their villages and then sail to some other location and then unpack everything, and so they don't really give up anything as much as they never really had anything cemented to abandon in the first place. While the Celts will move to a new location, and for generations they remember their Celtic ancestry. And so we've got the buckle, we've got our whole lineage mapped out, and yeah, so Braveheart is like a symbol of national identity for me. No, it's not really. It's an alright movie. I saw it once, but yeah.
I guess with
But
the Angles being the father of free government in the modern era, it's kind of makes sense that they forget everything.
right, well, that's Spengler's contention, is that liberalism is like an Anglo.
Democracy makes people forget things.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, that's Spengler's contention, is that liberalism is like an Anglo construct that is just a reflection of the Anglo existence, which is one that is that of a naval trading people that never had a conception of fatherland and only ever knew like their own uh, overcoming of the world by which they, or I should say, becoming of the world by which they see the whole world as booty to be plundered, and they sail to different locations and enjoy and appropriate what's there. And liberalism for the Anglo is like the market society where you set up all of your capital and you go and appropriate everything with it. And just like the Viking who would pillage villages, they pillage people economically today vis-a-vis market society. And so it makes sense that under like liberalism comes from the Anglosphere, which never knew. For instance, you take deontology, which is that comes from Germany. It envisions morality as duty, and the Germans never colonized. They always just stuck and were loyal to their country vis-a-vis the fatherland. You know, and this can so you can see how the Anglosphere never having deontology, always just having utilitarianism and other views that seem to maximize one's satisfaction and one's like happiness and one's pleasure and one's enjoyment of pillaging the world around them. That it makes sense why liberalism is like an Anglo phenomenon.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's been great chatting with you. I probably have to get going now because I got a ride to catch. It's been fun. Support what you're doing. Love the King Vault. Always true to the King Vault. So wherever just keep going with it. You're welcome in the Discord and everything. And yeah, brother, it was good.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Darren.
Yeah, it's no worries, man.